This is God and Autobiography, the podcast, a dramatic adaptation and continuing discussion of the book, God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher by Jerry L. Martin. He was a lifelong agnostic, but one day he had an occasion to pray. To his vast surprise, God answered in words. Being a philosopher, he had a lot of questions, and God had a lot to tell him. Episode 187. Hello, and welcome to God and Autobiography, the podcast. I'm Scott Langdon, and this week, Jerry Martin and I bring you another edition of our What's on Our Mind series. In this episode, Jerry and I reflect on episodes 183 through 186, and specifically address God's explanation of polytheism as God showing different aspects of God's self to different cultures and individuals. I find myself showing different aspects of myself all the time in everyday life, and all of them are completely authentic aspects of me. Is that what God is claiming about God's self? Join Jerry and me for a very meaningful discussion on what it means for each of our lives to know God in an intimate way. Here now is what's on our mind. I hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of What's on Our Mind. I'm Scott Langdon. I'm with Jerry Martin. How are you doing this week, Jerry?
Well, pretty well. And I thought some of the communications that we've received that we discussed the last few episodes were very interesting. And of course, we posted some things of our own during these times. So I'm looking forward to talking about them.
You've been on a trip. I have been away working on a play. So there have been a couple of weeks that had gone by that we were just emailing, and we had, missed our regular weekly Zooms with the rest of our team. And when we got back this week and reconnected, I realized there were so many things that I wanted to talk about and so many things I wanted to discuss, because this group of episodes that we're talking about today were so rich and so full. One of which is the Life Wisdom episode, number 18, where Abigail visits again, and you and she have a wonderful discussion. And when I think about putting these episodes together, I try to structure them around the episode at hand in the Life Wisdom Project. And this unit was episode 18, and it's Polytheism Explained. And so there's a lot of things in there about God being everything, and in the individual personhood of God, and separate and the same, and thinking more both and rather than either or. A lot of that kind of language is new and unpacked in that episode. And before we get into that, I wanted to start with the From God to Jerry to You series that we had in this unit, and it was on God-centered prayer. And the reason I want to start there is that the way that you talk about how prayer has worked for you in terms of how you've structured it, and how praying for the right thing, what that means, and all of that. What it comes down to, what I really got from it was, not my will, but thy will be done. And I want to start there because in virtually every religious tradition, but certainly the Judeo-Christian one, and certainly the Christian tradition of my upbringing, so it's the language that's most readily available to me, that is a direct quote from Jesus himself. And so we find in these other monotheistic religions the same thing, not my will, but thy will, in some form of expression. That. And what it does is so many things, surrender and all of that. But one of the things it does in relation to what this unit is about is it focuses on the relationship between I and thou, or between God and us in relationship. And that was the only kind of relationship that I ever knew growing up, that it was me here and God somewhere else. And so, with that as a given, the idea of not my will, but thy will was always implicit with it's me here and God there. So, with that dualistic understanding already in place, it's a feeling of surrender. And we've talked before about how surrender can have all kinds of loaded baggage to it, surrender. But that's really what you're talking about in that, right? Not my will, but I want to surrender to what you're doing. I try to start my day now the way you've talked about, which is, God, what do you want me to do today?
That's the key question for each of us. And it's not one big global question, thy will be done, and want to join a religion or some big one project. It's every day and even multiple times in a day. Sometimes I'm praying often, and most people are praying for God, please do something for me, rescue me from this situation. And those are earnest and an appropriate thing to be sharing with God, what you would like God's help with. However, the crucial question isn't making God, as he at some point said, I'm not a rescue helicopter, coming to land to save you. That's not what I'm about. Is on your beck and call. I have a 911 number. God is not a 911 number. But the key question in the relationship is it's like the orchestra conductor and the single violinist. I've got to be doing what the conductor is saying to do. When he points to the violin section, I've got to start with the other violins, right? And on the orchestra conductor's cue. And most of life is like that. There are things like the Ten Commandments, things you can sort of codify as sort of rules to love one another and so forth. Um, but most of life is live in micro bits, you might say, in the particularities of a day, of a relationship, how to treat my wife, how to treat my child, my parents, my next door neighbor, we have a conflict going on in our condo. Okay, how to handle that. And well, there's, of course, one uses one's own ethics and common sense and practicality, but there's also the question, God, what do you want me to do? And I often ask, this is kind of how I start the day, and it sounds like what you're reporting, Scott, is what are my priorities today? I always have a possible to-do list. I could do this or this or this or this, and they'd all be more or less good things to do. Well, what am I to do today? What's the priority? What should I be focusing on? And that's where I start, and it is a kind of surrender. And there is something liberating about surrender. You're releasing your own tight grip on your life and what you want. And you're saying, okay, God, take me where you want me to go. And okay, let's go together. you know, and God one day said, I was about to have a sandwich, let's have lunch together. Something that simple. And oh, okay, that's a nice lunch and a nice way to relate to God. And of course, I just ate my sandwich, but in the sense of a God companionship there.
As I mentioned, that kind of um, me here and God there, that there's this separation, the duality concept was with me all of my life until only a few years ago. I mean, I had understood that there were other ways of talking about God and our experience with God, but it never answered a lot of my questions or even quelled my anxieties about being separate. that God would somehow go away or is gone unless I did something to bring God back, or if God chose to capriciously, what seems capriciously to me, to show up here or not show up there. I wasn't sure. I was interested in being in a game I didn't know the rules to, that I felt like I had never signed up to play, that I just was thrown into this thing and trying to figure it out. And that didn't seem correct. So that's why I never really gave up. And then when we were working on this project and we got to really start to talk about the other ways that God came to other cultures and other individuals, I started to open up the possibilities of what that could be. And I didn't go full bore, but really kind of spent a lot of time with folks and teachers and concepts that were full bore, and those full bore concepts saying, this is all a dream. Stuff like, this is not reality. Reality is no thing. And we are just oneness. And all of this, we try to get out of this and live to the oneness. And Abigail talked about that in episode 185 in the Life Wisdom Project, where, yes, there is this, the essential nature of us all is God. And God says to you, that's true. The Hindu view, that's true. Everything is God. So I went, oh, yeah, that feels great and makes more sense. And yet, that still doesn't take care of the day to day. That doesn't take care of how I treat my wife or the other person across the street, or how they treat me. Or if somebody wants to rob me, I can't just go, oh, we're all one. He's going to stab me and kill me. I mean, I don't know, so that also didn't make sense. I was like, well, if it's not real, it sure as heck feels real. You know, I didn't know
Uh,
how to reconcile those two things.
yeah, I was told in prayer that it's in the book. Uh, if it's all a mirage, it's a mirage you can drink water from. This is the most real thing you can that you there can be. This is the most real thing there can be. And even in the Hindu tradition, I'm afraid I don't remember the details, can't tell a very good story on it, but there are cautionary uh, stories as well about this all is one because of the dangers of it. And one of them has to do with, oh, there's this rampaging elephant coming right at the guy. And he keeps thinking, it's all right. That's Brahman, and, and and the elephant gets closer and closer till he can feel the hot breath on him, and oh, it's all right. It's God, and then oops, it's over.
Mhm.
He's just trampled to death. Oh well, it doesn't look so good then. Okay, that's also God, reality in some sense, but you can't tell the whole story that way. And it strikes me there's a big theme of non-dualism these days, and I know a lot of people who call themselves non-dualist and feel great satisfaction in that, maybe having had some of the kinds of experiences earlier in life that you've had, Scott, where God was too distant and out there and where, and so they take consolation. But that view itself is too dualistic in my way of thinking. It's like either or. And we're not supposed to think either or. I keep getting told, because my logician's turn of mind is to put these two things are incompatible. But everything can be one, and yet we can be highly distinct individuals within that. And I'm told, of course, you're one manifestation of me. And then surprisingly, God says, I'm one manifestation of me also. So the God who presents uh, himself, itself, herself as a person to me in this rather intimate, even conversational way, that's a face of God, but not a face of God in the sense of a mere metaphor. I think Abigail mentions that at some point in that life wisdom discussion, but is really a person, even though that's not the whole of reality, of divine reality. It's quite real. that personal aspect of God and our personal aspects of ourselves and of ourselves to one another.
I was thinking about what a lot of people talk about today, and it seems like it's talked about a lot, but we want to find our true self. What's your true self? And we also talk about somebody else. We might say, "Oh, that's not the real them." Or if somebody has some drinks or something and they start talking, "Oh, okay, that's the real so and so, not the." And we're always thinking, what's the real one? Where there's this actor that I really love and I think they're terrific, but what are they really like? We want to know what they're like at home or what's their true self. And that can be such a difficult thing to talk about, especially when we talk about it in this way. God says, I showed different aspects of me to different individuals in different cultures. So to the Jews, it was this way, and I was thinking about that a lot. And I was thinking about how do you always want to be your most authentic self, but you're always showing different aspects of yourself in your daily life. So for example, if I walk into a Wawa, I'm showing to the person behind the counter that aspect of me is a customer. And maybe I'm shy that day or whatever. Maybe I'm more outgoing. That's an aspect of me. I go to work, let's say I'm a bank teller, the people at the bank know me as a bank teller. But that does, and I'm also, and this is true, I'm an amateur boxer. So people who I work with in the theater, say, don't know me as an amateur boxer, but that doesn't mean that I'm not. Do you know what I mean? You know me as this. Oh, I knew him better than anyone. Well, what makes you say that? Well, because you know maybe more aspects of me than anyone else. What are your thoughts on that aspect
Well,
idea?
I think that's all a very subtle thought and topic to reflect on, Scott. Uh, the authenticity talk, it kind of, in a way, in the Western tradition, particularly goes back to the Romantics of the early 19th century, who rejected the Enlightenment, the impersonalism of the Enlightenment, the rational, universal impersonalism, and wanted to affirm individuality. So it was a very understandable sort of revolt against something that seemed to leave actual people out of the picture, and feelings, emotions. It was also rationalistic. And so they kept thinking, in addition to the self that you present, your personality, you're in this situation and that situation, your what in older days was tended to be called your character, there's some deeper, really authentic self. And the key to life is to strip away everything else. You have this in the existentialist often, is to strip away everything else. It's all what do they call it? I forget Sartre's phrase, something like false consciousness, but that's a Marxist phrase. Bad faith, bad faith. It's all bad faith because you're not being the real you, the authentic self. And the whole goal is just to be you. And I must say, I've never liked that Frank Sinatra song, I Gotta Be Me, because I thought, what's so great about being Frank Sinatra? Okay, he's a good singer, but I know nothing else about him that would make me think, oh, he's the exemplar of how to live and how to be as a person. Uh, but in fact, and this is the depth that one would have to explore, these different aspects that you just went through, Scott, of you in these different roles, you as an actor, you as a boxer, you as a customer, you've been a teacher, you as a teacher. You're in a different role each time. A different persona is being presented, but they're all authentic. Normally, there's nothing wrong with just going in and being a customer. And you could say, oh, well, that's a paltry human transaction or something. No, it's what you're there for and what they're there for. They're just there to take your money and give you a receipt. That's their job. Your job is to take home the light bulbs you went to buy or whatever, so you can screw them in and have light. So, and all these different aspects of people are all them, except when they're faking. Or, sometimes people can be, living out a script rather than thinking, is this what I believe? Am I acting? Am I actually making the decisions for my life, or am I just going through rote? There's a trap kids often fall into. It's kind of living lifelong some script written by their parents. My parents, I didn't want to be a doctor, but they all had their heart set on my being a doctor. So I went to medical school and I'm a doctor. And the only thing I really like is something else I do, when I paint or golf or something on the weekends. That's the only thing I really like. The rest of the time I'm fulfilling a script written by someone else. Well, those are important reflections to have and to separate out. Better than authenticity, I think, is some concept like integrity. Am I being true to myself? Am I being honest with myself? It just starts with, do I know why I'm behaving this way? Do I have that degree of self-reflection? We often talk here about discernment, how you have to pay attention. Well, this is one of those areas in which it's extremely important to pay attention to what you're actually doing, what you're actually feeling, what your actual motivations are, why you're reacting the way you're reacting. Uh, and if you do that and you're clear about it and you're honest about it and you line up your thoughts and your actions and your feelings, they tend then to be kind of coherent and meaningful. And you're probably kind of doing what you want to be doing. And of course, add some prayer so that you add that to this thing. I'm sort of picturing them all stacked up, your feelings and your thoughts and your self-understanding and your motivations, but also what input you feel you're getting from outside, from your ethical intuitions, from your sense of what God wants you to do, that may come explicitly in prayer. It may just kind of come to you in a gut feeling, or you just kind of feel. I asked one person about becoming a minister. How did ministers are supposed to have a call, not just a job description that they think suits them. And well, God laid a burden on my heart. Well, I don't know how a burden comes on someone's heart, but he does. This is how it felt to him. Just and he's a deep introvert the way I am, and so this was kind of alien to him. He'd rather just hole up with a good book or something. And I attended his last sermon, and he's a very good preacher. So God made a good pick, you might say.
You mentioned that you don't know how a burden on your heart feels, how that would feel. I would argue, though, that you do, because you got one on your heart to write this project. That's what it felt like for you.
God told me to do these things. I had the decision, but I didn't think of it as a burden on my heart so much as God is speaking to me. I believe this is God, and I went through the whole literature on spiritual discernment and stuff. How do you know it's God when you think it's God? There's a rich literature on that topic, and had to rethink my epistemology. I'd done an epistemology of doubt, as I came to call it, which Western philosophers have done since Descartes, Cartesian doubt. And I reconceptualized it into an epistemics of trust, realizing all knowledge actually starts with trust. If you didn't trust your experience, you couldn't learn from it. You couldn't even correct it. We correct experience by trusting further experiences. And so on. Memory, you trust memory by remembering differently, and you trust your reasoning by checking your reasoning, and your arithmetic by doing the columns again. But if you didn't trust the process of adding and subtracting, you couldn't even check it, So anyway, an epistemics of trust. We have to start with trust. And for me, the question wasn't, is a burden being laid on my heart in some kind of, you might say, holistic way or emotive way, I don't know, a mood type way, Uh, but God just said, this is what I want you to do. And I thought, if this is something God wants me to do, I can either do it or not do it. And even though I could be wrong, I'd have no certainty that this is God speaking to me. I believe it is, and I've done due diligence to confirm that's a reasonable thing for me to believe. Uh, but it could be wrong. But still, okay, if it's wrong, I've done the right thing, even though, whoops, it didn't quite go where I thought it was going to go. But the alternative was to have God tell me what God wanted me to do and for me not to do it. And that seemed to violate the whole meaning of my life. And so that was an unacceptable possibility to me. So I went through it as more like a reasoning process. Am I going to do what God is telling me to do, what I hear God telling me to do, or not? And it's the kind of decision uh, prominent, certainly in the Old Testament, of Abraham is told, get up and go, and I'll tell you later where to stop, you might say. And that happens over and over in the Old Testament. People are just told to do things, and okay, they do it. And I don't know if there are New Testament examples of that sort. But anyway, it's certainly prominent in the New Testament, and prominent somewhat in the devotional literature in the Hindu tradition.
What's interesting to me about everything that you just said is that, among many things, one of the things is that God says to you, what I want most is for people to listen to me. Now, if a person says that, then what's to me implicit in that statement is that if you want me to listen to you, what's implicit in that statement is that you have something to say and that you are trying to communicate to me. And so if God wants everyone to listen, then that means that God is communicating to everyone all the time. So if that's true, then whether God uses words or art or another human being or an encounter with a nature walk or whatever it is, the method of communication doesn't seem to me to have a hierarchy.
Right. That's right. People often say, "Oh, why doesn't God speak to me?" There's nothing special about God communicating through words rather than some other way. And that's why I always say it was useful if he wanted me to write a book, to actually tell me what to say, and do that in words. But often, like everybody else, I feel guidance in these various other modes, just of uh, probably things more like a burden on my heart, a feeling in my gut. It just feels right. Sometimes you consider a course of action and it feels wrong. You can tell your parts are coming apart. And
Mm-hmm.
other
Mm-hmm.
times it feels very centered and yes, this is right. That, and we have to trust those kinds of intuitions as well, because that's, of course, God usually doesn't talk to people in words, or if he does, it's often something very brief,
Mm-hmm.
phrase.
Mm-hmm.
But God all the times talks in these multiple other ways that God repeats to me over and over in the course of the book. And as you put it, Scott, quite precisely, there is no hierarchy of modes of communication. In fact, you've got to, and I sometimes communicate with people who've written along the lines of, "Oh, why does God speak to me? I don't hear God. I don't sense God." Calm down and just let God come to you however God comes to you. And so don't be grasping for a particular divine manifestation. Just relax, and then that's where the paying attention and the listening comes in. And listening doesn't mean just listening for words, it means generally observing, thinking, paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
And that's listening to God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just going to say that I think paying attention and listening, that's a both and, I guess, because I see them as separate, and yet I see that they are in the same category. But when I think about listening, I think about um, one thing, and I'll tell you a story about this in a second. When I think about paying attention, I think about something else. Last night, very specifically, of this recording that we're doing today on Friday, the 28th of June. Well, last night, I had a performance of Bert and Me, the musical that I'm in right now at Mount Gretna Playhouse in Mount Gretna, Pennsylvania. And the playwright has a house within walking distance of the theater. He lives
Oh,
there.
amazing.
He and his wife. And it's just beautiful. It's in the woods, and they have this beautiful house, and it's a big porch. And they invited the cast and all of us over to have a little party after the show and sit on their porch and chat and stuff. And I love that kind of thing. And I hate that kind of thing, Jerry. That is so hard for me because I'm an introvert. I
Oh,
really
you,
am an introvert.
yeah, I've
I
never
can't.
understood this. A lot of performers are actually
Ooh,
introverts. That's always been a surprise to me.
but I love people. I love being around them, and I
You
love.
know,
But
no,
I just, it's
introversion has
ooh.
nothing to do with misanthropy. It's you like people, but you also need a lot of time just with yourself.
Mm, yeah. And so last night I thought, we had done a show, we had done a matinee, and then we had done an evening show. So we did two shows yesterday, and then go to this, and then I was going to have to drive home because we're doing this today. And I thought, I'm going to be too tired and da da da. And then I thought, no, 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 this is something you should do. But then when I decided to go, I really paid attention to what we kind of started this conversation with about. And that is, I went, okay, I want to actively engage with everyone there. And I'm going to listen, and I'm going to talk, and I'm going to not be on my phone or think about other things. I'm going to focus in. And when somebody's talking to me, I'm going to pay attention to them, respond to them, and I'm going to be intentional about it. And I did, and it went wonderfully, and it was great. And I stayed, not terribly long, and I went home. But the other thing I could have done was just give in to what might seem to have come natural, which would be to just sort of be there and not participate and just sort of veg in the corner or whatever. It's not that I'm saying one is better than the other. I just made a decision that I was going to be this way instead of that way because I felt like this would be more beneficial to me and to everyone else, just whomever I came in contact with, to pay that kind of attention to them. And neither one of those ways would have been an inauthentic me, or this, it's an aspect of me. This is an outgoing Scott Langdon. This is what that looks like. This is an, introverted Scott Langdon. That's what that looks like. And all of this is exactly what I do for a living. I'm creating this character every night named George, who has a son named Joe, who goes to college, and they have this whole relationship around Burt Bacharach music. And it's just, and when I think about what it takes to be George fully and completely, and to really, I want to know what he's about. I want to know what happened to him. I want to know. And when Joe, his son, says something or doesn't say something or is going through a situation, and as a father, I'm not thinking about my son in the moment. I'm thinking about Joe. I'm fully invested in this boy Joe. And when it's over and I'm reflecting, I realize I've learned something about myself, Scott, and my relationship with my son because of having been George and doing it again and doing it again and doing it again. So I feel like, in that same sense, as God is everything, God is fully participating in every single moment. So God must be really curious and invested in all of these aspects of us, how I show up as a customer, how I show up as a husband, how I show up as a, whatever background character I am in everyone else's story.
Yeah, yeah. I've known people who think, God is the grand orchestrator of the whole universe. How could God be interested in little me down here doing nothing? Nobody doing nothing. Well, of course, doing something, but and worry about it in prayer. What's my point of praying? It's like God's too busy. God's already got a great big job, as though you were trying to get to I don't know, the CEO of General Motors or something. Think, oh, that guy's awfully busy running everything, so he can't pay attention to me. Um, but but God isn't like that. God is more like Scott the actor, except with limitless capacity. And so God is doing what you're doing with George, and in a funny way with Joe, because you're trying to also, I gather, sense, well, Joe's end of this relationship with George. And uh and God's doing that with Scott right now and Jerry right now and any listener right now, and is making things available to us or steering us. Again, if you pay attention, it's not just listening to the words coming out of your mouth and mine, or this or that background kind of thing going on in the listener's environment, but you just pay attention to which parts, what's coming to you that seems to be a kind of guidance or sense of direction, or can be warning for your life, and trust that this divine omnipresence is reliable. It's real. It's real. And the odd thing is, and it's hard for people to get over these dualistic categories, if either we're all one or we're all many, let's say. No, we're both one and many, and so is God, oddly enough, is one and many. And God as a particular person is also a particular, but a particular manifestation or embodiment or actualization of the divine. And God's playing out God's role, not God's role in the sense of pure actor, but God's job, you might say, in this world in dealing with us. That's who God is in this world. And we're all moving forward. God isn't fully developed. We're not fully developed. As Abigail says, God can't mail a letter. Okay, God needs us to do a lot of these things. And once, when I asked God to love me for something seems scary, said, "Let Abigail love you and feel my love through her." Okay, that's a lot of human life. So you come. What in a way, Scott, we keep talking about this. We draw lessons, you might say, from God and Autobiography. Is the buoyancy of life, the plenitude of life. And you got to be kind of open to it and aware of it. And that doesn't mean just everything is wonderful. No, you got to be discriminating which parts are wonderful and which parts are not wonderful, and which parts are even wicked, and wickedness in others, wickedness in oneself. And so you got to be on guard of those. You need multiple kinds of discernment. You need social discernment, moral discernment, aesthetic discernment, all down the line, all of which involve paying careful attention. And to say God is behind them all, well, that's fine. That doesn't mean every act of moral discernment of noticing, oh, no, this person's cheating. I'm not going to cheat on my taxes. I'm filling out my taxes. I'm not going to cheat on them. That decision may or may not be prominent in a kind of God consciousness, but it's part of what I'm sensing as my right role in this life. And God always seems to be helping in that, to the extent you're open and trusting of the divine presence and omnipresence, you're going to do your job better. And then trust that there are things you can discern to be discerned. when you pay attention to situations, to human relationships, to rights and wrongs, to practicalities even, that there's something to be determined there, and to be doing them honestly, self-aware, and as best you can in concert with God. And that's why I recommend praying, "Thy will be done," which is not because God is distant and sending down, a big megaphone orders. The kind of background you had, Scott's very different from my experience with God. I don't even quite relate to the question, is God here or there? I see people talking about God, rejecting usually the idea of God is somewhere out there. Well, I don't know where God is. I just know God is present to me, and I think God's present to you and everybody. And to me, that doesn't require the metaphysical thesis that God, all is one and one is all, though I'm told that something like that is true. God is everything. Okay, that's fine. But even without that assumption, my personal experience of God is not of a distant being, but it's one of an intimate being.
Thank you for listening to God and Autobiography, the podcast. Subscribe for free today wherever you listen to your podcasts, and hear a new episode every week. You can hear the complete dramatic adaptation of God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher by Jerry L. Martin by beginning with episode 1 of our podcast and listening through its conclusion with episode 44. You can read the original true story in the book from which this podcast is adapted, God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher, available now at Amazon.com and always at godandautobiography.com. Pick up your own copy today. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, please email us at questions@godandautobiography.com and experience the world from God's perspective, as it was told to a philosopher. This is Scott Langdon. I'll see you next time.